In my last video, I said hello for the first time and gave you some background to this channel and why it exists, essentially. Just a very quick recap, I was adopted at 9 days old in 1970 in England, and my parents treated me as though I were their own. And I think at that time, why wouldn't they have done that? They didn't have all the benefits of the knowledge that we have nowadays around what it is to bring up an adopted child and what it is like for that child experiencing adoption. So, as a consequence of that, my relationship with my parents, but more particularly, unfortunately, with my mum, was very fraught for many years. It caused great heartache and sadness and confusion on both our parts, I think. For her part, she felt as though she was failing. And for my part, I felt guilty as soon as I was able to understand that feeling for not feeling as though I was loving them enough. And it caused all sorts of problems. I essentially hadn't bonded in the way that I think she hoped and believed that I would. And so, therefore, I felt bad for not bonding in the way that I thought that I should. When my parents adopted me, they didn't think they could conceive naturally. But lo and behold, a few years later, my sister was born. And when I saw my parents' relationship with my sister, it became really clear to me that there was something that was very different about my relationship with them. How I viewed them, actually, and I think how they dealt with me. I feel as though they were really struggling to know what to do for the best. I was very quiet, very withdrawn, very compliant, and later as a teenager, quite rebellious, confused, angry, and massive issues of identity that kicked in around my mid-teens. And I didn't really know where to turn with it. I had 1,000 questions. I didn't really understand what it was all about. Obviously, I'd known I was adopted. I was told I was adopted very early, around 4 years old, I think. And so I had grown up knowing that that was my truth. But we had no support and there was no education available to us around what that might mean for me. Obviously, over the years, there's been a lot more research that's been carried out, so there's a lot more available now than there was back then. But there were still certain things, I think, support systems and knowledge, pieces of knowledge that would have certainly made the transition much easier for us all. So I went into therapy for the first time in my 20s. I was very, very depressed at the time. And I've been in and out of therapy since then, really, and on my own journey of self-development. And I now work as a psychotherapist, but my studies took me down the route of psychology, trying to understand human behaviour, later counselling, and later existential psychotherapy. As part of my master's, I had to do a research topic, and we were told to pick a topic that we felt really, really strongly about, really, really passionately about. And so for me, there was really only one topic, and it was wellbeing in adult adoptees. And my research question was, what more is there to learn about wellbeing in adult adoptees? It was a very emotional journey. It's a few years ago now. It's a very emotional journey for me, reading some of the personal stories and connecting with other adoptees who had felt similar to me. And that was something that growing up I never really had the benefit of, was speaking to other people that might have felt the same way that I did. I was just struggling alone with my guilt and confusion, and trying to assert myself amongst my parents' confusion and upset as well. So it was an emotional thing to do the research, hugely rewarding. Anyway, my group understudy was limited to adult adoptees who had been adopted close to birth And there was a reason for that. I was trying to exclude groups that might complicate the adjustment process more than the straightforward fact of adoption. So I was excluding groups of adoptees who had gone through the care system or who had been physically or psychologically abused pre-adoption, or who had been adopted interracially, or who had been adopted by same-sex couples. And that was really just to try and create a like-for-like comparison in terms of wellbeing measures with the general population here in the UK. The Office for National Statistics records our wellbeing, has done now for several years. So what I was trying to do was trying to get a slice of information on this slice of the population, the adult adoptee population, and not just in our country. Actually, the research led me to North America and Spain in terms of the papers that I studied. It was a literature review, which meant that I was looking at and gathering work that had already been carried out by other researchers. A lot of that came from North America in terms of longitudinal studies, whereby they kind of follow the life of adoptees and they do questionnaires. And it was mixed methods mainly. There were some questions in there, but also interviews and things like that. And there was very little here in the UK, which was a bit disheartening in terms of research that had been done. So I'm proud to hopefully be able to add to that. What dropped out the bottom of my research was that there were reasons that adoptees, as we understand, reasons that adoptees struggle to adjust. The main reason being that we now understand the experience pre-birth, that in the child in the womb is already experiencing some form of just experience, essentially. So pre-birth, and then the separation from birth mother that represents a trauma, and there is evidence now available that backs that up and has shown that on the brain scans of children separated from their natural or their birth parents. It's funny, I have to be careful what terms I use, because when I was growing up they called it the natural parents, and I don't know, it's interesting, and in this field it's evolved over the years, and some people say birth parents, some people say biological. So I'll use the terms interchangeably. I guess it depends on the generation, but I tend to say biological parents, actually, more so now. So that separation absolutely causes a trauma for the infant, and that trauma then dictates, I guess is the word, and often it affects how that infant then behaves and how they go on to develop. So the findings were super interesting. Essentially boiled down to what I managed to kind of squeeze out the bottom of the research was six, like a toolkit, if you like, of six kind of things to think about when considering adopting, and then also after you have adopted a child. And they're really simple and straightforward, and some of them a bit more complicated and kind of difficult to really think about in real terms, I suppose, but the vast majority are very, very simple and straightforward. And I think if my mum had known about those six things, then even if she hadn't been able to kind of act on them throughout my life every time that there was something that came up, then it would have still been better that she'd have known about it, because she might have managed to do that some of the time. As it was, there was no knowledge whatsoever. So some of the findings would have been hugely useful in our relationship, and as I mentioned in my last email, that's why I'm doing this. She feels very strongly that it's important for future generations of adoptees, as do I. So I wrote a piece, an article, a guest article or post on a website, a colleague's blog, and about my findings, and I listed what those 6 things were, and that got shared on Twitter. And unofficially, I have to say it was an unofficial endorsement by the CEO of Adoption UK, who said that, who retweeted it and who said that these 6 points were very important to consider in terms of moving forward with change in the world of adoption. So that was a very proud moment for me, but it's just kind of the start for me in terms of getting this information out there. So huge. That's why I'm here on YouTube doing this. I've got my dissertation that I'm now looking to rework for to be a published paper, and that's a journey in itself. I have to have a co-author, and she's my supervisor, and she's helping me to do that. There's no guarantee that paper will be admitted, but I have to prepare it, then I have to submit it for review, and then the panel will come back and say, no, we're not having it, or they'll come back and say, we'll have it with changes. And we believe that the latter should be absolutely possible. So once that has been published, fingers crossed, then I plan to kind of take that information again and make it more widely available. That will mean that it's available as part of the research bank, if you like, for people studying and people looking for evidence of research that's been carried out. But for me, it's really important that people who are considering going down the road of adoption can also get their hands on that information. So I've got to have a think about how I make that happen. Some thoughts are some kind of a book or pamphlet. I don't quite know yet, but it's got to be something that I do is to kind of bring this information. So that's my plan for the information, and obviously I shall be talking about that on here and all things adoption related. Adoptee, I've experienced it from the perspective of my mum. We've had some very open and frank conversations, some very difficult conversations over the years, actually, and especially more recently when I found the strength and the courage to initiate some of these really tough conversations. So I have experience from my own perspective, and I have experience from her perspective, and I also have limited experience, but I am in contact with my biological mother, and so I've got a bit of her perspective as well that I can throw into the mix. And of course, having worked in a therapeutic space with my clients, I have anecdotal information and experience to kind of support this approach. So that was it, really, just to give you the next instalment and an update on the actual work, the process that I followed, and next time I should be talking about some of the findings. Okay.